The snow had begun to fall early that year, quieting the groans of the wounded men and softening the blood-stained ground around River Run. War had changed Robb Stark. The boy who had once smiled with grey wind at his side now stared into the distance, with the eyes of a hardened king or a tired one. The tent flaps opened behind him, letting in a gust of cold air and a soft voice that carried no joy. "She's here," said Catelyn Stark, voice low and burdened. "Lord Walder's daughter. They've arrived." Robb didn't move at first. For a brief moment, he imagined Talisa, her voice, her laughter, the way she touched his arm like it meant something. But that future was gone now, torn apart not by death or betrayal, but by duty. He had broken a pact once. He would not break it again. "I'll receive her," he said flatly. They had made all the arrangements. Walder Frey had sent not his prettiest daughter, but not the ugliest either, the kind that could pass a room unnoticed. Her name was Alira Frey, 17, quiet, unremarkable, the kind of girl fathers used for trade. She stood beside her. Father in the main hall of River Run, dressed in grey and blue silks that looked out of place in this cold fortress. Her eyes flicked up to Robb as he approached, and for the first time, he saw something unexpected. Fear, not the usual timidness of a girl forced to wed a stranger, but something deeper, like she knew she was walking into a lion's den wearing rabbit skin. Walder Frey's voice carried over the hall. "My daughter, Alira, she's yours now, as agreed." Robb looked at her. She didn't lower her eyes. She met his gaze, not bold, not defiant, but not weak either. Just present, just aware. He gave a curt nod. "I will honor the alliance," he said. "She will be queen in the north." There was no wedding feast, just a brief, somber ceremony and silence. His men didn't cheer. They watched with cold, uncertain eyes. They remembered Talisa, and so did he. That night, Alira Frey sat in the corner of their chambers, hands folded, eyes wide but dry. Robb said nothing for a long time. He simply sat across from her, unbuckling his armor piece by piece, as if the war hadn't followed them into that room. "You don't have to fear me," he said eventually. "I don't," she answered, voice small but steady. "But I know. You wish you weren't here." Robb looked up. "You're not wrong." She flinched a little, but nodded. "Then let's be honest. I don't want to be your wife, but I will play the part. I'll be what the North needs, even if you never love me." That hit him harder than he expected. Not because it hurt, but because it was true. The days passed like frostbitten hours, each colder than the last. Alira moved quietly through the halls of River Run, polite to Catelyn, respectful to the lords, and almost invisible to the men. But she watched, always watched. She listened to Robb's war councils, never speaking, but remembering everything. One night, after a long council meeting, Robb found her alone in the war tent, staring at the map of Westeros, fingers hovering near the neck. "You're planning to strike Harrenhal," she said, not looking up. He frowned. "How do you know that?" She finally turned. "Because that's where the Lannisters would be weakest, if Tywin rides west. You're waiting to see which direction he moves." "Am I wrong?" Robb stepped closer. "Who taught you?" "Strategy." Her expression didn't change. "No one. I just listen. You think I'm just a Frey, but I was raised in a viper's nest. I had to learn fast. And in that moment, something shifted. Just a little. But enough for Robb to wonder if maybe, just maybe, the girl he married for peace might turn out to be more than a shadow in Talisa's absence. not love, not yet. But something else, something like the beginning of respect. Alira didn't ask for permission to be useful, she just did what needed to be done. Within a week of the wedding, she had learned the names of every key bannerman, every sworn sword who still whispered Talisa's name, and every chambermaid who gossiped near the fires. Not out of affection, but survival. A fray in the north. Had to walk lightly or not at all. Catelyn Stark remained distant, polite but unreadable. She carried grief like armor, and Alira understood what wasn't said. She would never be Talisa, never be loved by this family, and that suited her just fine for now. Robb noticed, though he watched her from across council tables and dinner halls. She spoke little, but when she did, it was worth hearing. Once, she quietly corrected Lord Umber's numbers about enemy cavalry. Another time, she pointed out a supply issue before the steward had even seen it. Each time, she proved she was no mere pawn sent from the twins. One evening, as the army prepared to march toward Harrenhal, Robb summoned her to his tent. "You said you wanted to help," he began. "I did. Then help me understand your father." That made her pause. She sat down slowly, gathering her thoughts before she spoke. "Lord Walder wants to be feared more than respected. If he feels ignored or disrespected, he'll lash out, but not with swords. He'll scheme. He's patient, petty, dangerous when humiliated." Robb raised an eyebrow. "And you?" She didn't blink. "I want to survive, and maybe make something more of this name than just leeches and cowards." The honesty hit him again, brutal and clear. "You're different from the rest of your house." "I have to be." That night, Robb lay awake for a long time. He could feel her presence on the other side of the tent, quiet and still, not asleep, just breathing. They shared a bed now, out of expectation, not affection. He hadn't touched her since the wedding night, and she hadn't reached for him either. But the silence between them no longer felt cold. It was simply waiting to become something else. As they marched on Harrenhal, the road turned darker. Rumors filtered in of atrocities left behind by Gregor Clegane's men. Bodies, burnt villages, children nailed to doors. Alira rode near the supply wagons, organizing, directing, whispering with the camp healers. She never showed disgust, only determination. Even when one of the northern soldiers insulted her behind her back. Freyhor, she said nothing, just remembered his name. Robb heard about it 2 days later and confronted her. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it doesn't matter," she said, jaw tight. "I didn't come here to be liked." He shook his head. "You're my queen. They'll respect you or answer to me." She looked at him for a long time. "You say that now. But how long before you regret marrying a Frey?" "I already did," he said honestly. "But that's changing." She blinked, visibly caught off guard. He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. They reached the outskirts of Harrenhal, under a clouded sky. Scouts reported the castle abandoned. Gregor's men had fled, leaving only ruins behind. But as Robb and his lords inspected the scorched halls, they found something else. Survivors, a handful of broken peasants, women and children hiding in the dungeons, trembling at every sound. Among them was a girl no older than 12, face swollen, hands shaking. She reached for Robb's cloak and whispered, "They said you'd never come." Robb's hand stilled. "Who?" "The Lion's Men," she said. "They said the North would forget us." He stood frozen, guilt and fury rising like bile. Alira approached, knelt beside the girl, and gently wrapped a clean cloth around her wounded arm. Her voice was soft but strong. "The North remembers," she said. That night, the story spread through the camp, that it was Queen Elira who calmed the wounded, ordered food for the starving, stayed up tending to the children with her own hands. No grand speeches, no theatrics, just action. Some of the men started calling her Snow Rose, a flower from the phrase that somehow didn't rot in the frost. Robb heard it in passing. He didn't correct them. Later, he found her alone in the ruined sept, lighting candles for the dead. Her eyes reflected the flames, not with tears but with fire. "You're not what I expected," he said. She looked over, half a smile playing at her lips. "Neither are you." And for the first time since the war began, Robb Stark realized. He was no longer grieving a lost love. He was watching something new grow cold, cautious, but real. By the time they held Harrenhal, something had shifted in the hearts of Robb's men. Whispers of Queen Elira's quiet strength began to weave through the campfires, carried in the same breath as their war stories. She wasn't beloved not, yet but she was no longer distrusted. The Northerners were stubborn, slow to warm to anyone with Frey blood, but they respected action, and Elira gave them plenty of that. Still, not all hearts were changing. Lady Mage, Mormont, cornered Robb in the great hall one evening as he looked over supply routes. "You trust her too quickly," she said without pretense. "A Frey has poison in the bones, no matter how softly they speak." Robb didn't lift his head. "She's done more for this war in 1 month than half our allies. She listens. She acts. She understands how this world works." Lady Mage narrowed her eyes. "And do you understand what it means to have a Frey in your bed, in your ear?" "She's my queen," he said. "By right and oath." Mage scoffed. "Oaths mean nothing to her father." Robb looked up then, eyes colder than the snows beyond the neck. Then let's hope she didn't inherit his faith in breaking them. The conversation stayed with him, not because he doubted Elira, but because he realized how alone she must be, surrounded by suspicion, fighting a war she didn't start for a kingdom that didn't want her. That night, Robb approached her tent not out of duty, but something closer to guilt. He found her at the writing desk, scribbling letters with her head bowed, candlelight flickering over her dark hair. When she looked up, she seemed surprised to see him there. "You write letters?" he asked. She nodded. "To the bannermen, minor houses, lords who haven't chosen a side. I send them updates, strategy, promises. I sign them as Queen Elira Stark." He blinked without my leave. She shrugged, not defiant but direct. "If we wait for approval every time, the Lannisters will be thrown before we blink. Besides, I know what they need to hear." He walked in, curious. "What do you?" "Tell them that you're not your father." She folded a letter, "that you're willing to make hard choices, that the North needs unity, not sentiment, that the queen you married is not a girl who will cry herself to sleep while the realm burns." He stared at her for a long time. "You speak like a soldier." "I was raised in a house where kindness was seen as weakness." Her voice was quiet now. "I learned to speak like those who get listened to." Robb stepped closer. "You think that's what I need?" "I think it's what the North needs. You can be brave and kind, Robb Stark, but kindness alone won't win you a throne or a future." There was silence between them for a moment, heavy but not tense. "Why are you really helping me?" he asked. She looked him dead in the eye. "Because if you fall, I fall. But if you win, maybe I become more than just a Frey he had no choice but to marry." Maybe I get to write a different ending for my house. That hit deeper than he expected. Without saying more, he leaned in and placed a hand over hers, just for a second. She didn't pull away. That night, he stayed in her tent, and for the first time since their wedding, it wasn't about duty. It wasn't about alliance. It wasn't even about love. It was something raw, unsaid. A moment where two people who were never meant for each other quietly admitted they no longer wanted to be anywhere else. But peace never lasted in war. By the end of the week, a raven arrived bearing grim news. Lord Karstark had murdered 2 Lannister squires, prisoners of war, an act of vengeance, a crime punishable by death. The council was divided. Some said Robb couldn't afford to lose another bannerman. Others urged him to show strength. And then there was Alira, silent at first, but when the tent emptied, she finally spoke. "If you let him live," she said softly, "you prove you'll bend when the cause is emotional. If you kill him, you send a message that your justice is colder than your grief." He rubbed his face, exhausted. "There's no good choice." She stepped closer. "Then choose the one that keeps you king." He looked up at her, torn. "And if I lose the Karstarks, then we'll find someone better, someone loyal, someone who fears your justice more than they hate your cause." Robb closed his eyes, already feeling the weight of what he'd have to do. She didn't offer comfort, she offered steel, and he realized that's what he needed most. The day Lord Rickard Karstark died, the skies turned grey, and the wind carried whispers of rebellion. Robb Stark stood before his bannermen, his sword clean, his voice heavy with judgment. "He betrayed our cause," Robb said. "He took justice into his own hands and murdered boys under my protection. That is not vengeance, it is chaos. And I will not have chaos in the north." No one spoke, but their silence wasn't loyal, it was afraid. The Karstarks rode out that same evening, abandoning the war, leaving behind only bitterness and broken banners. Back in the quiet of their chambers, Robb sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the fire. Alira poured him a drink, setting the cup beside him. She didn't speak. She had already said what she needed before the execution. Now she gave him space to hate the silence. "I killed a man I fought beside since I was a boy," Robb muttered. "I sent his sons to die in battle. And now I've taken their father too." "You made a king's choice," Alira said. "Not a son's, not a friend's." He turned to her. "Do you ever regret not loving me?" Her lips parted slightly at the question. She sat beside him, cautious but honest. "I don't know what love looks like when it's real," she said, "but I think it feels less like surrender and more like choice. I didn't choose you for love. I chose to survive. I chose this crown, but I don't regret staying." He studied her face, the strength in her jaw, the sadness buried just beneath her words. He didn't know what he expected. A declaration, an apology, a lie. What he got was better. Truth. A few nights later, another raven arrived. This one, from the twins. Walder Frey wanted an audience. He demanded it, rather. A wedding had been promised his daughter, given to a king. Now, Lord Frey wanted recognition, influence, a place at court. His pride was swelling. And with the Karstarks gone, Robb knew he had no room to lose another ally, no matter how foul. He and Alira rode to the twins. The journey was long, bitter, and tense. The Frey men who met them were polite enough, but the air was thick with expectation. Robb had taken Alira, yes, but he hadn't used her. had an advanced house phrase position. To Walder, a marriage without power was an insult. Inside the hall, Lord Walder sneered over a goblet. His daughters flanked him like statues, soulless and unimpressed. So, he drawled, the young wolf returns, and with my little Elira on his arm. A shame I had to send her away before the bedding. Always liked a loud bedding. Elira didn't flinch. Robb's fingers twitched near his sword. We came to honor the alliance, Robb said. You've kept your word. So have I, Walder chuckled. Oh, you've kept something. I'll grant you that. But word on the wind is you're losing. Bannermen, losing battles. If I'm to be your ally, I need assurances. Robb's jaw clenched. What do you want? A seat at your court? A Frey title in Winterfell? And one of my grandsons raised by you as a ward? No, Robb said at once. Elira touched his arm gently. Let me speak to him, alone. He looked at her, unsure. But she was already rising, already walking toward the corner of the room with her father, her voice low but firm. No one knows what exactly she said. Some claim she threatened him with what she knew about his bastard dealings. Others say she appealed to the last sliver of decency in him. Whatever it was, when they returned to the table, Walder Frey raised his goblet and grunted. Fine, no ward, no seat. But I want your next child to have Frey blood in the name. Robb was too stunned to speak. Elira answered for him, done. That night, as they lay in their chamber, Robb turned to her. What did you say to him? She stared at the ceiling. I reminded him that if you fall, no one remembers who I am. But if you win, a Frey becomes part of legend. He was silent for a while. You keep saving this war in ways I don't see until it's done. Elira rolled to her side. That's because you keep looking for knights and banners. I look for cracks. He studied her silhouette in the dark. You scare me sometimes. Good, she said. It means I'm doing it right. But somewhere in the silence, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. It wasn't love, but it was trust. And that was far rarer in a war like this. The North was changing. Whispers of Robb's execution of Karstark had spread like wildfire, but so had stories of Queen Eleratha, Snow Rose, the Frey who defied her blood. The pair had become a strange symbol, a king and queen who didn't marry for love, yet ruled with something colder, something unshakable. Still, the war ground on, and every raven brought worse tidings. Winterfell had fallen to the bastard of Bolton. The Ironborn had burned the castle. Bran and Rickon were thought dead. The North was bleeding, and Robb's claim was now tied to a ghost. But the worst news came from the south. Casterly Rock was holding strong. Tywin Lannister was not riding west. He was riding north. Robb called council at once. The war had reached its turning point, and the decision he made now would decide everything. The hall at Harrenhal had grown colder. The lords argued. Some wanted to fall back, others to strike at Riverrun. A few dared whisper of surrender, and then Elira stood. I have a proposal, she said. Silence fell. You need numbers, she continued. You need men who still remember your father and believe in the North. The Umbers, the Glovers, even some Blackwoods and Brackens. They're afraid now, not of the Lannisters, but of backing the wrong man. Robb frowned. And what would convince them otherwise? A king who holds Winterfell, she said. Take it back now, before the Boltons can rebuild. Make the North remember who you are, not just in name, but in blood. It was dangerous, suicidal even, but it was bold. And in a war where strategy had failed and alliances had thinned, boldness was all they had. The march began at once. They moved quickly, cutting through riverlands and forests, dodging scouts, burning bridges behind them. The northerners who remained, loyal, rode harder than ever. For once there was no division, no doubt, just cold vengeance. When they reached Winterfell, the sky was snowing Ashdod. The Boltons were unprepared. Theon Greyjoy's men were already scattered. The traitors inside never expected the wolf to return. The siege was swift and brutal. Robb led the charge through the broken gates. Grey wind tore through the first line of Bolton men like a ghost. Robb's sword found Roose Bolton's cousin in the great hall. Steel met flesh. The traitor screamed once and was silenced forever. When it was over, Winterfell stood smoking, bloodied, but theirs again. Illyria arrived at dusk, her cloak white with frost. She stepped through the ruined gates as the northerners chanted the old words, "The King in the North." She looked up at the broken towers and the carved direwolf over the arch. For a moment, even she seemed humbled. Robb met her at the courtyard, mud on his armor, blood on his cheek. "You were right," he said simply. She nodded. "I usually am." He laughed, a short sound, worn by war but still human. Then he took her hand, in front of all the men, not for show, not for politics, but because they had survived everything the world had thrown at them, against all odds. She had never betrayed him, not once. "You've earned your place," he said, "not just beside me, but in the north." Illyria blinked. Something flickered in her expression. Pride, surprise, maybe something softer. But she only said one thing. "Then let's make sure they never forget it." That night, Winterfell saw its first true feast in years. Not a celebration of peace. The war wasn't over, but a celebration of something stronger. Resolve. The lords, who once doubted her, drank to her name. The small folk whispered about the queen who dared to walk among them, eat their bread, ask their names. She didn't need to smile. She didn't need to flirt. She ruled by being exactly what the North had become: hard, cold, enduring. She sat beside Robb at the high table, his hand resting near hers. They didn't speak of Talisa, or the past, or what might have been, because the future, this strange, unexpected, powerful future, was already being written, not with romance, but with steel, fire, and blood. And in that future, Illyria Frey was not just the girl he had no choice but to marry. She was the queen who helped him keep the North.